Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Cleave podcast. This is John LaFront, and this is part 2 of our Q&A series, where we're responding to some of the most common and emotionally loaded questions we hear from this community. In part 1, we talked about boundaries, guilt, change, and helping children grieve difficult family relationships. In this episode, we're going deeper into what happens when a spouse has not fully left and cleaved, while siblings can come from the same family and still carry completely different experiences, and what healing can look like when you are trying to stop letting unhealthy family dynamics take up so much space in your mind. We also touch on a really important distinction that many people miss. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. This conversation is honest, personal, and probably a little more raw in places because these are not abstract ideas for us. These are things that we have had to wrestle through in our own marriage, our own families, and our own healing journey. So, if you are in the middle of that wrestle too, we hope this episode gives you clarity, language, and encouragement. And without further ado, here is part 2. All right, the next question. What if my spouse still hasn't fully left and cleaved? And this does come up a lot, and it's just that one of the spouses is come to awareness of a lot of this. They understand the concepts, they understand the doctrine, they understand God's wisdom and order, but the spouse isn't quite there yet. And it's often because that spouse came from a family system that operated very, very differently. And so they think that what they're doing is normal. And that it is just the way it is. So it creates this tension and this conflict. So this does come up quite often, and there's various extremes to it. But how would you answer that?
You know what? I just think right off the bat, obviously, I have said in this podcast many times that used to be me. John has always been much better about understanding this part of marriage. And I've told the story many times where he told me, like, why do you always put your family first? We covenanted to put each other first. And I was like, oh, we did. Oh, wow.
You're right. We did.
It was the first time I had ever thought about it like that because, I don't know. I was just on autopilot. Like, yeah, we just get married and then we'll both make my family happy.
It's so interesting because in those moments, it is just a sign of maturity. And we got married young.
Yeah.
And as a result, I think we still very much looked to our parents for advice and whatever. And I think parents can sometimes kind of prey on that, especially unhealthy ones. But it's just a sign of maturity. It's like all of a sudden your eyes are open to the covenant that you made and you go, oh yeah, right. So
right. So I would just say, as a spouse, just educate your spouse. Because truly, when they've never really seen it like that, they don't know that they're operating from that really unhealthy place. Now, we were young when that happened. I mean, that happened in the first few months of our marriage. And so I started to kind of shift the way I was seeing things. And it took years to be able to get to the place that I feel like I was able to fully grasp it and implement it. But acknowledging that kind of misunderstanding within myself that I had, all I'm trying to say is we didn't get too far down the path in our marriage without me realizing this. And I feel like people who have done this for years where, you're in your 40s or late 30s and you've always put your parents first, there could be a lot of damage that's been done in the marriage because of that. And so I know it's not just as simple as educate them, because you probably now have years of really, really harmful experiences, just plain and simply from your spouse acting from a naive place. And, but yeah, I think education is key. And when you see it happening, you have to tell your spouse and remind them. And it might get uncomfortable. The one thing about John in our marriage is I think I've shared this before, but I've noticed you don't necessarily love when I bring things up to you.
What are you talking about?
He can get pretty defensive, and I don't like it. I don't like bringing things up. But I've learned, and not everything needs to be brought up. Some things really are just like my mood or my issue, or I'm holding on to something that I shouldn't. But if something gets to a certain point, I pretty much know, okay, I need to talk through this with him. And it's not, he doesn't always love that. And the conversation doesn't always go well. Sometimes it does, other times it doesn't. But the thing I love about Jon is in our marriage, I have noticed that even if he's defensive in the moment and doesn't give me that super understanding, like, oh, I see what you're talking about, I'm so sorry. I will see his behavior change. He will take what I've said, even if he didn't like it in the moment, and I will see him changing his behavior. Or at least making efforts. And, sometimes he has feedback. Well, like, I'm doing that because you're doing this. And that's insightful for me too. But all that to say, I know bringing things up in marriage can be really hard because we're both kind of harming each other. And there is often that. Well, like, yeah, but you're doing this too. And that can get hard. And that's why people sweep things under the rug. But be brave enough to just have the uncomfortable conversation, just bear the discomfort of the reaction, but kind of see, like, are they trying to change? Are they listening? Or are they not? And if not, why? Again, you may just have years of deeper things to heal. But all of that to say, I think pointing it out to a spouse and having those conversations is really important. And if they are just so aloof and they do not accept it at all, I go to therapy. Like, at that point, you need clinical help. And for each of you to be together going through these things. And therapists are so helpful. Having somebody else accountable is so huge. Even just speaking the words, speaking the truth to a third party it changes all of our brains somehow, and we're all able to see the truth in a new light when it's not just our brains warping it. And I really feel strongly that that's why, like in the LDS church, we are told to go to our bishops when there's been certain sins that need to be repented of. And I don't think it's because it's like, oh, so that he can shame you. It's just that speaking the truth to somebody who's unattached from the situation is powerful for our brains to be rooted in reality and be able to see things in a new light.
Yeah, and the thing I guess I would just add to this, being on the other side of that question, well, number one, it's very common for women to still be pretty dang attached to their family of origin.
Mm-hmm.
That is a process. And you don't need to completely undo that. It's not like you need to completely sever it, but you know in your heart where their heart is, right? And if they're turning to their parents first and foremost, or their mom or their dad, and they're prioritizing them over their spouse, and you feel that, then that does need to be worked through and addressed. That is out of order. And that is a huge sign that there is something wrong. And so to Ashley's point, I think, the other book that I highly, highly recommend is called Crucial Conversations. And there are methods and ways that you can bring these things up so that people don't get defensive. And I've asked Ashley to read that book many times and she won't. So
I've tried. It feels boring at the beginning.
But there are strategies and tactics that you can take through that process. But be patient. You don't need to just cut ties and do things that are dramatic. And some of you might be type A personalities that just want to get things done. And once you've gained this knowledge, you want to implement it immediately. And if their spouse doesn't jump on board, then they're the worst human in the world. Like, slow down, calm down, and try to do this in a systematic way. To cleave is a process, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it will continue to happen. That is a part of the covenant and a part of why we're here. And the other thing I would just say, we've read this before, but just marriage is such an interesting unit because we both are helping each other heal our own childhood traumas. Like there's a reason why we're together. And when those things feel prickly, it's just that is the beauty of marriage too, is that we get to help get those rough edges, and make them smooth and round. And it takes time, it takes love, it takes patience. Um, but it can be done. So don't just give up hope, through that process. I know it can be frustrating if you're light years ahead of your spouse and trying to implement these things in your marriage. And I'm never saying that I was light years ahead, but I'm just saying there are people that we read and I'm like, yeah, you get it. You're completely on board and your spouse is completely aloof. That can be a really hard disconnect. So we have compassion for that.
Yeah. And I do just want to say again and emphasize, because this is where, like, when you're dealing with years of marriage issues, we talk to a lot of people. A lot of people will call for coaching sessions. Like, we see this. It can feel like a lot to digest. So just remember, by small and simple things, great things come to pass. That really is the truth. It's always been the truth. Don't get overwhelmed by trying to eat the whole elephant at once. But I would just say, be really prayerful. Heavenly Father, what is the truth that I can know and understand today? And even if you think that your spouse is the problem, there's always something that you can learn, that the Spirit can teach you to help you either be able to address it or understand this behavior of yourself that's exacerbating it. Or I don't know. It's hard to put into words, but that's why we always say this has to be done with God, because He is the one that will show you the small and simple truths that will change the trajectory of everything. And it doesn't matter how messy and ugly the stuff from the past is, He can still change marriages by small and simple truths. So start there.
Yeah, it's great advice. Okay, I think we might bypass this one. The question is just, how do I know when forgiveness is possible and when reconciliation is not yet safe? And the reason why I say, let's maybe skip over that one, is just because it really is the changed behavior.
Yeah, well, we did a whole episode on forgiveness, so go listen to that.
We'll put that in the show notes because we talked an hour about that specifically. But yeah, the headline is you got to look for the changed behavior. And if the changed behavior isn't there, then you can't actually be safe. And the other thing
that's
is
reconciled.
Yeah. And reconciliation. Forgiveness is possible without reconciliation. They are not synonymous. They do not need to be together. And that's the biggest aha moment I think people can have. Forgiveness is for yourself, right?
Well, I will just say this because it's Holy Week, and I liked this. I was thinking about Jesus on the cross saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And I just kind of had this realization that in my head, I had just always thought oh, He just gave everybody that harmed Him a free pass. They won't have to suffer the consequences of what they did because He just forgave them. And it's one of those beliefs I've had that I've never really even thought about it until this week. I read that again and I just felt like, that's interesting. Jesus asked the Father to forgive them, but I know now that those people weren't seeking forgiveness. So what does that look like? And so I did a little bit of a deep dive, and I just, I realized it was really beautiful in my study, but forgiveness is something that we offer to somebody and it frees our own hearts, really. But, they have to choose to receive it, and them receiving it is repentance, right? But they won't always receive the gift of forgiveness we give, but it's necessary for us to offer it. And whether or not they receive is their own agency and their own repentance. And
that gift of forgiveness is given to all people. And that's why Christ said it, is that it doesn't matter. The vilest of sinners has that opportunity. But But in order for it to take its full effect, the other party does need to repent and the change of behavior needs to happen in order for that to kind of be complete. But
or the remorse.
God is always going to do his part of that process. And that is his commitment and his covenant to us, that he will show up and do the forgiveness side. We have to do our end of the deal, which is the repentance side. So yeah, it's beautiful. Okay. Number 6, or the next question here is, why do siblings experience the same family so differently? And Ashley and I both came from large families. So I'm the oldest of 7 children, and Ashley is the youngest of 7 children. And boy, ain't that the truth, that every kid experiences the family differently. And there's going to always be a trend or theme, or there's things that are shared for sure across siblings, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are the differences. And there are many, many factors to that. But what would you say?
I would just say, ask yourself. I mean, I feel like most people we're talking to are parents themselves. Do you treat each one of your children exactly the same? I'm going to tell you, if you say yes, you are unaware of yourself. None of us treat all of our children exactly the same.
And you shouldn't, because the kids are all different.
Yeah.
And they're all unique. And so that's also
and their birth order matters, and their gender matters, and
our maturity, the way we were as parents in our young 20s versus where we're at in our 40s is different. We're showing up differently as parents than we were 20 years ago.
Yeah, but I can tell you, like, I'm constantly evaluating this within myself. My oldest child, I put a lot of pressure on her to be that oldest child. I need help. I have other little kids. Like, you got to help me. I think I was hard on her probably when she was little, not like super hard, but she knew that she needed to level up. And so she learned to do that. And then, and she's very responsible and she's very whatever. And then the second child is just free as a bird. She will do whatever. She does not care what I say. I mean, she does, but like, I'll be like, hey, can you make your bed this morning? Oh, we'll see. It'll be a surprise for you. Like, I'm just like, and like my oldest child will be like, you would never let me speak to you that way. And I say to her, I'm like, it's because your personalities are different. Like, she has a different sense of humor. You would never say that. Like, when you're kind of clapping back at me, there's almost like some resentment in there where she is just like genuinely, I don't know, funny in that way. There's without resentment. So like their personalities are different, but I'm navigating it differently. I have expected things of the oldest that I haven't of the second.
They have different survival mechanisms, right? Like, again, as humans, we're always looking for safety. What our oldest did was, I need to be obedient in order to be safe, right? Like, that was her coping mechanism. And the second said, I need to be funny and like change the atmosphere. Yeah. And she's very, very good at that. But a lot of families have that dynamic, right? Where one child is the uber responsible, the other one is the class clown. And why are they? Well, they've learned that when they tell jokes and when they're funny, you know what I mean? That then people are disarmed and they are, anyways, they're different coping mechanisms that they have. And it's important to just recognize that.
Totally. But I even still to this day, like one's 18 and one's 16, and I just rely on the 18-year-old to do all the super responsible stuff because I know she will. That's not actually good for our 16-year-old, and she's capable. And I try more to give her more responsibility, but at the end of the day, if I want ease, I'm going to ask the oldest child to do it. And sometimes I feel bad for that second child because I actually know that that's a disservice to her and that I'm being lazy because she is very capable. And so again, we are not as parents always operating from like just a perfect place. And you have these dynamics and they're dispersed through every aspect of life. These kids experience us and our parenting very, very differently. And we react to them based off of, yes, their personalities and their birth order and all kinds of different things. They are growing up in different environments with different experiences, in my opinion.
So the one thing I would say, we've kind of talked about what I would consider normal family dynamics, right? And those exist in all families. If the family dynamics shift into more of a toxic or unhealthy place, that is when you start seeing the roles of scapegoat, and the peacekeeper, the one that's just kind of in denial and stays asleep, like when those personalities start manifesting themselves, again, recognizing that they are coping mechanisms that these people have had, but I think you need to be mindful of that. Of, are some of my kids my flying monkeys? Are some of my kids the scapegoat? Like, am I? And that's where I think as spouses, like, we have to come together and have a good, honest look at that. Because we're going to jive with different kids at different times for different reasons. But you have to be so careful that it doesn't go down that unhealthy path where we're using our children to, as our own coping mechanisms, and that we're channeling our trauma like through them. And that's where you have to be really mindful. But in the unhealthy family system, that's why kids can see it so differently, is because they all had to adopt different strategies to be able to survive in the family system. And like Ashley's coping mechanism in her family system was to be the peacekeeper, meaning she just didn't ruffle any feathers at all. She said yes to everything. She was sweet and docile and didn't ever share her opinion about anything. And that did not serve her well moving into
Well, it
adulthood.
took me a long time to even form opinions, to be honest, which
Yeah.
in and of itself, but that doesn't grow a person. So I really battled, like, why don't I have a sense of belief in myself?
Yeah.
But on the sibling front, as I've been just thinking about it, there are three things, we'll see if I can remember all of them, that I really feel like I do with our kids to try to combat this. Number one, I never compare them to each other, ever. I never say to our second daughter, Lily makes her bed every morning. Why is it so hard for you? I do not do that. They have different personalities. I try to celebrate them because, again, we can't really do much about our siblings and, our different experiences growing up. Some may want to see it, others don't. But what can I do in my family? I can help my kids to be able to have great relationships with each other. And I do that by never comparing them. And when they're compared, like when they compare themselves, well, why? This person does this, or like, how do you not get mad at her for not making her bed every morning? And I'm just kind of like, you know what? I pick my battles, and that's not something that, I make her do it occasionally, or she has to do it as soon as she gets home from school or whatever. But like, it's just not always the same. She has a different personality than you, and that I have different expectations because of that, honestly. And so just, I do not compare them. Number two, I don't complain about one to another child. And when they complain about it to me, and they often do, it happened just a few days ago, like, don't you think this is weird that this person's doing that? Like, that's so weird. I try to just be like, yeah, I can see how you might feel like that. I don't. That's not my perspective, because this is how I feel about it. I'm raising a lot of teenagers. You're going to go through phases. I think that's just a phase. I'm not worried about that at all. That's a very normal thing for a person that age to do. You watch, that'll disappear. Because what that does is it signals to them like, oh, mom probably has my back too. Because if I were to be like, yes, oh, I think that's so weird too. I don't know why that's happening. I hate that person is that way. If you do that, you create this thing that it's like, oh, well, what are they all talking about behind my back and agreeing about? But I want them to feel like they can come to me and be like, is this weird? And normally I'm trying to, no, sometimes there's things that are like, yes, I don't love that that's happening, and I will say that, but only when necessary. For the most part, I really try to help them have each other's backs and see the best in each other. And number three, I do not get jealous by the relationship that my children have with each other. If my daughters are talking till 2:00 in the morning in one of their rooms, which happened last weekend, I'm so thrilled for them. I love that. I love that they have that bond, and it doesn't have to include me. I have my own bond with them. And I just make sure that they know that I love their relationship. And if my one daughter will almost always tell her sister something before she tells me. And I love that. I'm fine with that. I don't make it about me. I don't get jealous because it just adds a competitive nature, and then they learn to behave that way. And we need to celebrate. I love that those two sisters have something in each other that will sustain them for life. I would never want to take it away by becoming jealous and trying to insert myself. And a lot of parents sabotage themselves by doing one of those things. And they're things that I obviously saw my own parents do that I could just see were not. It ended up sabotaging them and their relationships with their children and even their children and their children's ability to function in healthy ways. And I don't want to do that. So
Yeah. I don't think it is one of the biggest ahas that parents have. What you're describing is called triangulation, right? And that is when you're gossiping about one child to another child, you're pinning them against each other, you're trying to get information and insert yourself in between the two, and you're almost trying to sabotage the relationship a little bit because you want to be the person that they come to, that they value the most, that they whatever. That's where you have to give a good hard look and say, I still have some of my own childhood wounds that have not been healed and I have work to do. Because if you keep doing that with your children, to Ashley's point, it ultimately comes back to bite you big time, because as those kids grow into adulthood, they really resent that. And the other thing that I thought was just insightful that you shared and so true is that when you do something to one child, they do register it and go, they're likely doing it to another child. That is data that they look at. And so if you're participating in, kind of that gossip or that complaining or that this, that, and the other, then they know that their name and they're not safe with you either. Mm-hmm. And that then creates a lot of insecurity. It creates there's lots, it can go down a very negative path. And I think we could do a whole episode just on triangulation alone. That is one of the more common messages that anytime we talk about triangulation, it goes crazy viral, because I think people have that aha of like, oh, my parents did that. Mm-hmm. I will also say this, though. It is one of the topics that I see parents and maybe parents that have adult children that when they come into awareness of it, they take accountability for it. And it's just one of those ones that I think happens so naturally in families, and it's happened for generations in many cases, that they don't see how damaging it is. But many people have this aha moment of, that was a big part of what I did to them in childhood. And if you can have that awareness and strive to fix that, it will go a long ways. But anyways, it's just a very common thing. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So last question here is, how do I stop letting my family live rent-free in my mind after going no contact? Boy, we're 3.5 years into this. And
finally just feeling like we're kind of getting there. Yeah. For me anyway.
Well, and that happened, it was like last October, probably, right? When you kind of finally had this freedom where you were like, whatever they say or do, it's not going to impact me anymore, and you finally like kind of just cut that off, and not cut them off completely. You still love them, you still feel connected, but it was exactly this. I'm not going to allow them to live rent-free in my brain anymore.
And I think that was honestly directly correlated to my hope that they would ever change. And I think through enough experience, it just took time and experience for me trying to get them to change, or praying that they change, or hoping that they change. Now, listen, I still pray that they do change. I do actually do that. But I am totally okay if they never change and if it all happens in the next life. But it really did take enough pain, I think, of me trying to like get them to see, or even hoping that they would see, or longing for them to see. And once I just, at some point, you have to realize this is costing so much. And I actually did realize that. Like, I honestly longed to not care far before I actually did. But I think that, again, asking the question is a good indicator, because I think when you want it, it will come. Other people want to stay victims of their circumstances and their family and who they were for their entire life. That is what they want, and that's why they never move on. But if you actually want to be able to just kind of disconnect from the pain, I think that you will eventually. It just takes time. And, somebody can say to you all you want, stop trying to control them, stop wanting something for somebody that they don't want for themselves. I heard those messages till I was blue in the face, and I knew that I was doing that I was wanting something for somebody that they didn't want for themselves, and that I was trying to control them through wanting that. But at the end of the day, the only thing that got me over the hump was experiencing pain for long enough, and enough kind of like attempts to have conversations to get them to see, and realizing that they were not going to finally just accept they're never going to. But that's a process. And so, and some may genuinely get there faster than others. It took me 3 years. And it wasn't always as painful as it was. Like, the third year was way less painful than the first, but I didn't fully disconnect until about year 3. And, I am totally and completely at peace for this to never resolve in this life now. And that is so freeing, but it does take time and prayer. And so just be patient with yourself. I think self-compassion is really important.
And I think so. A couple different thoughts I have on that one is recognizing that this is grief. Like, that is
Yes.
what it is. And you
Yes.
are going through the grieving process. And it is a process. And there is no way necessarily to speed up that process. Everyone grieves differently. And so you do need to have compassion with yourselves. But you had to make a choice. Ultimately, it came down to you choosing to let go.
Yeah.
And it was because you had done a lot of the healing work. But yeah, you can study these things until you're blue in the face. It's the actually putting them into application is when you choose to do it. And some of
Yeah.
us won't, because the grief still feels like connection in some way. And you still want that connection. And even if it's the crappiest connection in the world, it still is connection. And so you have to be ready to finally let that go. And you do need to partner with God on that. And I think you need to have a good, honest conversation with yourself of, is this still serving me, or is this holding me back? Do I need to let this go so that I can move forward in my journey? Because, and I may have shared this before, but I loved a talk that I heard from Michelle Obama at a Qualtrics conference 2 years ago. But she was talking about, ascending a mountain. And when you do that with a team of people, and so in this case, we could talk about it as a family, you're all trying to ascend this mountain together. You often stop at a place that you could call base camp. And what base camp is you check on everyone's vitals. Do you have enough water? How's your energy? Any blisters on your feet? You're checking everything. And there are going to be some that go, I ain't doing it. I'm not climbing that mountain. I'm not ready to do it. But you might be ready to climb the mountain. You have done the work. You've prepared yourself. You have the tools and the equipment, and you can keep ascending the mountain. One of the hardest things is to leave people behind. But you have to, because otherwise you stay stuck in that base camp with them, and you don't get to ultimately reach your true potential because you're holding back. You may justify in your mind that is righteous and noble and that you're sacrificing for them. And you can tell yourself all those stories that you want. But the reality is, God wants you to move forward. And and he will partner with you in it. But you have to use your agency to choose to do that. And it's one of the biggest lessons, I think, to learn in the human experience is how to detach and differentiate yourself and then partner with God on the path that you're going. And you can encourage people to come join you all you want, but ultimately your mission is not going to be determined by their choices and their decisions. You're going to keep going on the path that you need to, with or without them. And so,
Yeah, that's really good. And I love that you brought up that it's grief, because it is. And you're right in that it is a choice to let it go. It ultimately is a choice. But it's interesting because it's a choice I tried to make many, many, many times before I was actually able to do it. And so that might be the deeper question. Like, okay, we can want something, but I keep praying for it. When is it going to come? And I can't really tell you the answer. And as I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, maybe it was just the power of the atonement that I had.
You allowed it to come in and heal.
Yeah. And then it was time, and again, I had tried to allow it to come in and heal before, but sometimes our longing for it and praying for it and wanting it was an exercise, and I got better and better and better about having like the inflammatory situations not make me upset, so I could see myself grow a little bit at a time. And if you're seeing that in yourself, that's good. And I think eventually it will come, but yeah, just be patient, because I know that like whenever anybody would say it's a choice, I would be like, I'm trying to choose it and I can't, like it's never fully gone. I'll be maybe fine for 2 months. And then, so I think looking back, it was just, I had enough time and experience to know that I couldn't have what I wanted. And then the power of the atonement kind of came in and helped just take it from me, I think, when it was ready. So I can't fully.
Do you feel like, I love that, and I think you're spot on with the atonement. Was that a matter of trusting, like, that Christ could do that for you? Like, or was it, because some of it, again, is choice of choosing to apply the atonement, right? Or choosing to go down that path. But like, what kept you from applying the atonement earlier on? Because I don't think that Christ was just hanging back saying, I'm going to let you suffer for 3.5 years, right? Like it was, there was still something that turned you, and you've had faith in Christ through the whole journey. It's not like you've not partnered with him on that, and he has helped all along the way. But ultimately, what was that?
Okay, well, this is the first time you're asking me this question, so this is my thought. In the fall, and Jon knows this, there were 2 really significant things that happened. Number 1, I found out that I have a family member who is harming women, a lot of them, all over the place. And there's people online talking about it. There's so many comments of people talking online about it that it's like, okay, this isn't, it's okay not being proven in court, but how can you deny so many people saying this one individual has harmed me and the pattern? I brought that to the attention of my family and just said, I have said that these problems would get worse, and here's the proof that they are. How can you deny this? And their response to that was to send us a legal cease and desist. And I think it was experiencing that level of their denial that helped me really wrap my brain around how incredibly unhealthy they are. Because for so long, I operated from a place of seeing the best in them. I know they're good, and I still know that it's in there. You know, I want to see the good. I want to operate from the good. I love them. That's where I have wanted to be. And I have just kept hoping and hoping and hoping, like while seeing the dysfunction, that they could let their good take over. But that experience to me showed me again for a 20th time that they are much, much sicker than I have ever really known.
Well, and that they are getting more sick with time.
Yes.
And I think that,
Yes.
again, as each of us are little data scientists and we're observing things, you're constantly looking for that changed behavior. And I think in your case, it was you consistently saw no changed behavior whatsoever. Right. And then when you saw that it was getting worse.
Yeah, they're doubling down on all the evil.
And you tried to warn them one more time, and they basically said, forget you. Family's everything.
Well, and now we'll try to sue you to be quiet because they hate that I know. And so they want to keep us quiet.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was just so extreme that it was, again, back to the very beginning question on love, you know, and do they miss you? To me, I just kind of go, if they say that they miss us, it feels so empty to me because if you did, you would do something about it. But instead, your actions tell me that you don't miss us at all. You just want us to stop growing and progressing. And that is the concept of the crabs in the bucket. And they're just they want to pull you down, pull you down, pull you down. And that's when you have to say goodbye. Like, you're in God's hands. I'm going to go ascend the mountain without you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hate to say it, but that's what it took for me, is just
it was just so bad.
The realizing how deep they are. And I just, it's a bigger animal than I ever even realized. And I always knew it was big. But yeah. So there you go.
All right. Well, that concludes we'll probably do this in a 2-part series, but our question and answer episode. So if you have questions, send them to us. We want to have a pulse on this community and how we can help. These Q&As, I didn't prep Ash with the questions. I didn't really prep myself much. I just keep an ongoing thread of the questions. And we chose to just kind of give our raw reactions. So it maybe wasn't as polished as it normally could be. But I think that's the beauty of it, is that we want to be as authentic and real with you as we possibly can be. And if our journey can help you along your own journey, then it's absolutely worth it for us. So keep asking the questions. We'll keep doing our best to answer them, and we'll all continue to ascend the mountain together. So that's it. Have a great one.
Be brave. Have a great day.
All right, everyone. Thank you for being with us for part 2 of this Q&A. These questions were deeply personal, and they get to the heart of so much of what this community is trying to navigate: marriage, family systems, forgiveness, grief, truth, and the long process of healing. If there is one thing we hope this episode leaves with you, it is this: healing is often slower than we want it to be, but that does not mean God is absent from it. By small and simple things, great things really do come to pass. If this conversation resonated with you and you want to go deeper, we'd love to invite you to read our new book, Leave Then Cleave. It was written for people trying to navigate the pain, confusion, and complexity of family relationships with greater clarity, courage, and faith. You can read the first chapter free on our website, or if you're ready, you can order the full book there as well. I will put all the details to that in the show notes below. And as always, keep sending us your questions. These Q&A episodes matter to us because they help us stay close to what you are actually carrying. And if our wrestle can help you in yours, then that really just means everything to us. So thank you for being here. And in the words of Ashley, be brave, and we'll see you again next time.